All right, good afternoon. It is 3:03. We're up. We got the online link up. Hang on. Is my... We're muted. Yeah, we got a bit of an echo. That might have done it. All right. Welcome to the Facilities Committee meeting of the 9th of February. We've got a full agenda today with important information. So we'll go ahead and get started. Here in the boardroom are Ms. Carter, Ms. Cash, Chair Mahaffey, and Vice Chair Haggerty. And joining us online, I see Ms. Kushner, I see Ms. Scott, and those are the board members that I see at this time. So welcome to everyone. We'll begin by entertaining a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting. Ms. Cash?
Yeah, I make a motion to approve last meeting's minutes.
Thank you. Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. The minutes are approved. All right, we will go right to our agenda then. We'll begin by looking at a fascinating schematic design for the M19H11 site. This is the extension to Parkside and the high school biotech campus at Mooresville.
Good afternoon. We are here today to present to you the schematic designs for Parkside Middle School, Wake Early College for Information and Biotechnologies. Today I have with me Alice Reese, who is our senior site planner, and Elizabeth Wakeford, who is our senior facility planner, to present the presentation.
As you know, this is a truly unique project for Wake.
Elizabeth, can you get the mic a little closer and turn it on?
Oh, just the whole thing. Okay.
All right.
Can you all hear me? Okay. As you know, this is a truly unique project for Wake County Public Schools. We've designed in this project a standard middle school with 1,200 plus students and a small high school with an enrollment of 400, primarily 9th and 10th grade students, 200 of which will be on campus at any one time. The other 200 will be at the Wake Tech RTP campus taking classes. So combining middle and high school populations has its challenges. However, our collaborative efforts with Wake County Public School stakeholders and our design team, led by Evoke Studio, has produced a solution which is both innovative and inspiring. For every school, our project goals are to provide connection and community, both within the school population and the community as a whole. As such, this project will create a single campus identity for both schools, which is reflective of the diversity of the students within it and for the community in which it resides. The building will be integrated with the site with views and spaces which take advantage of its natural features and offer opportunities for outdoor learning. Very importantly, with this combination of school populations will be a clear separation between middle and high school through circulation at each level and between each level, and through the arrangement of classrooms and learning commons. Next slide. Unique indoor spaces and flexibility for collaboration will be enhanced by outdoor views and opportunities for interaction with it. Now we'll delve into the schematic design of this project, beginning with the site.
Good afternoon. As you know, the site is located in RTP. Our neighbors around the site, directly across to the north, will be the future Apple site. Our neighbors, or northeast of the site slightly, is Wake Tech Community College. You can see just shortly in the distance. Our neighbor directly to the east of us is Fujifilm. Our neighbors directly to the south is medium density residential. And our neighbor to the west is Parkside Elementary. So what we have in front of us is an interesting design challenge where we sit prominently facing technology but serving our young citizens. Adding to the design challenge, natural and man-made features of the site itself. Natural features on the site include a stream buffer on the east, and the topography itself is quite a feature. You see a prominent ridge running through the site in a diagonal direction, and the topography falls off to the streets and the stream buffer on either side of that ridge. The pink area in the middle kind of indicates that buildable space. Man-made features also surround the site, including a gas easement running on sort of the west portion of that pink section and to the south of the site between our site and the residential, as well as the streets, Little and Davis. The vertical and horizontal site distances are somewhat challenging and kind of, no pun intended, but they drive those driveway locations. In front of you is the proposed layout for the site. Now, my typical presentations to you, I dive into vehicular circulation, but based on some questions I've received in the past few presentations, I'd like to talk about how the site itself shaped the site design. We'll start with the topography. So basically, we talked about that ridge, and we are locating the building on that ridge with the classroom wings of the building somewhat facing Little and taking advantage of that ridge to where we can align the classrooms with that ridge. So the building will sit prominently on the high spot. Then the athletic fields and the parking will terrace down to the street and the stream. So it creates that nice transition from building to parking to street and building to athletics to natural stream. It's like Elizabeth was saying, it creates a good opportunity to terrace and marry the man-made and the natural elements on the site. Also, the topography enables that third wing facing, kind of pointing towards Davis, to take advantage of topography again. That's our back of the house, our service and cafeteria and dining, which Elizabeth will talk about, but that loading dock and service area is 4 foot below the finished floor elevation. So this is a really nice opportunity to take advantage of that natural drop in the grade. Also, I'm going to go ahead and show you some images from the architect's study models. These study models kind of inform how the design works, but I also wanted to show them so that it more clearly depicts how that topography is working with the site. I do want to note that the image you see underneath the design is an older image, but it did help, these studies helped inform the design that I presented a couple slides ago. So the large image on the left, you see how the athletic fields are dipping down towards that stream buffer, so you can really see the building, the softball kind of in the back is one level, and then you go even further down to the track and field. And what we're sort of investigating in this image is how that seating can perhaps fit into the topography, or if we're going to just grade it out and use a retaining wall to create a seating space. So this is kind of what goes on before we bring it to you. The image on the lower right is basically from Little Drive, looking at the entrance of the building. Why I like this image is it shows you how that parking area can be broken up by the topography versus a sea of parking straight out front. So it really kind of emphasizes the entrance of the building. And the image at the top right shows you that back of the house side What you see there is a large multipurpose playfield. We had originally thought that it's above program for middle school, but because there's high school and they will be taking PE, we thought that was something that would be needed on the site. We've since spoken with academics, and again, Elizabeth will talk about the building layout, but the high school site is closer to the track and field. So we'll probably decrease the size of that playfield. And again, you may see that dark, large retaining wall holding up that playfield that enables us to kind of lessen that earthwork required for that large size playfield. And we're going to try to create a smaller grassy space that can integrate with the cafeteria dining patio and create another outdoor learning space. And so the site circulation, we'll jump right into that. So this is an interesting opportunity as well. We've spoken with NCDOT and with Wake County Transportation. Currently, Parkside Elementary School has 3 buses that serve it. So we're going to go ahead and use the Parkside Elementary bus driveway that's existing to run our buses in and out and over to the middle school. Yep, and they'll drive forward to the front of the building and drop off at the front entrance and exit out the same driveway. Parents will use the driveway in the middle, which is there furthest on the left shown on the plan. It's a one-way entrance, so they'll enter, they'll parallel the property line and kind of parallel it on the east and then the south, and then jog over the gas line. It's important that you create kind of a 90-degree crossing of that gas line. But it also enables us to get more stacking on site, too. They drop off at the front of the building and then proceed back out the site on the driveway located kind of in the middle of the property frontage. That's a right out onto Little. We have a third access point on Davis Drive to the south, and that access would be used by service vehicles, staff parking, and potentially buses if we're going to end up parking them down in that parking lot. So like I said, we're still exploring that playfield, that parking lot, and haven't gotten that totally worked out yet, but we're getting there.
So as Alice has explained, this building truly fits its landscape. In working with the topography versus against it, we have the opportunity for the larger spaces of the main and auxiliary gyms, the auditorium, and the dining spaces to nestle into the hill at the lower level. The yellow areas denote exclusive middle school use. So there that you have the main gym and associated locker rooms, the auditorium, and the middle school dining. The pink areas denote exclusive high school use. The auxiliary gym, which is shown in blue, and its associated locker rooms, and the high school dining. The shared kitchen, shown in gray, separates each of the dining and serving areas between high school and middle school. Next. The main level sits at the top of the topographic ridge, as Alice explained, and welcomes students and visitors with a generous landscape plaza serving both bus drop-off and carpool drop-off. The entrances themselves are separated, with high school being to the left, shown in pink on top, and middle school being to the right, shown in yellow at the bottom. There is an overlook to the middle school dining from the main middle school circulation stair. On this level are both high school and middle school admin and student support services. The high school wing includes classrooms and labs and learning commons. The middle school wing includes visual and performing arts, CTE spaces, and the ECS suite. At the second level, again in pink, we have high school classrooms and labs, learning commons, and support spaces. The media center is shown, the middle school media center is shown in blue, and it centers on the 2 middle school wings, which contain 6th and 7th grade classrooms, learning commons, and support spaces. The third level shows the high school classrooms, learning commons, and high school media center, shown in blue. and the middle school 8th grade classrooms, learning commons, and support spaces.
So the design team is also studying options to meet flexible capacity requirements on site. We have identified the area south of that classroom wing. It's the blue square as the best option on this site. This image here shows a single classroom unit located at that lower level, so the service entrance level. And if you'll go to the next slide. These two images show options on the upper level, so the same finished floor as that main classroom corridor. One option to locate individual units, and then another option to locate a single 6-classroom unit. So these studies help us inform our discussions with long-range planning and school choice, because each of them, as you can see, might offer a pro or a con, such as being on the main floor level or the individual units, which, bringing them in and out on the site might be an issue. The large single unit pushes a retaining wall out into that area we've identified for parking. But like I said before, with the multipurpose field in this parking area, as with the mobiles, we're still studying this area to work out how to make all those elements work together.
So an alternative solution for flexible capacity is to build the additional classrooms either during original construction or sometime afterward. This scheme would create a third level at the end of the southeast middle school wing, which could accommodate an additional team at any grade level. Next slide. This 3D schematic view shows the additional capacity within the building as well. We will continue to work, as Alice said, with student assignment and long-range planning to determine the best solution for this campus. And again, just to reiterate, we are just studying this issue in schematic design, just trying to figure out what the best solution might be. This school is going to serve as a really unique bridge between Wake County Public Schools and Wake Tech RTP, and also as a potential foundation for a long-term partnership between North Carolina's largest public school system and the Research Triangle Park as a whole. We're very excited about this project. Thank you.
Questions? Mr. Haggerty.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. So this is a wonderful plan. Everything looks fantastic. And I apologize, my questioning is going to go off based on this design, but off into another area. We've had some conversations about how we think about flex space and flex capacity. We've talked about improvements to the building. We've talked about mobile units and some of the pros and cons with mobile units. But we have a unique situation out here in Parkside and in this part of the county, which is the need for additional capacity, right? We've seen schools that have opened at Austin Ridge that have already filled up and are capped. Parkside Elementary, right next door, already capped. And I know as a board, we've sort of been disfavoring mobile units. But is there a chance on a project like this that there could, if there is, I guess, the intention of potentially adding mobile units at the middle school, that mobile units could be brought into the elementary school and utilized during the construction process that could then be transferred over to the middle school for flexible capacity? Or would it be something that once installed or once placed at the elementary school, they could not be used at the middle school?
I want to say Alice was the site planner for Parkside. I think that it was determined at that time that we were not allowed we would not be able to put mobiles on the Parkside campus. The only location were, 4 mobile classrooms possibly at the front entry? No?
I think you have space behind. as the bus loop comes around.
that you could put them there.
That's my recollection. I'm sorry, it was a couple years ago.
Okay, yes, and I'm looking at her because she was the site designer as the CLH when we did Parkside Elementary School. So typically, the cost of moving mobiles is very costly. So we would typically, probably if we put them at Parkside, they would stay at Parkside, and we would bring in new mobiles over to the middle school.
I didn't know just with the shared property boundary,
Right.
if there was any way to mitigate that in terms of the cost of moving or anything like that. If the cost of moving was more moving it on public roads versus moving it someplace else on what's not legally the same property, but is the same contiguous parcel. So-
Yes, because we have done that at Leesville, where we have mobiles that are on the Leesville campus that the elementary school can use because they're so close. Yes. So that may be an option that we could look at in the future,
Okay.
absolutely. Like we said, these are all studies that we are doing right now.
Okay. And I apologize.
No, it's a good question, though, but it doesn't, wouldn't, and that kind of thinking is what we need to do, but wouldn't that require sort of a plan, right, if we would use the mobiles temporarily for the elementary school, we would have to have some plan to sunset those should the middle school need them.
That's right.
And that's another hitch that particularly out there, I'm not sure I see sunset.
Right. It is a bit of a risk, but
Yeah.
as you know, in our board meeting, we were capping new schools, including the very newly opened Parkside Elementary.
Right.
And so in talking to community members who are very concerned about the overflow school being so far away at Adams, they've come back and they've asked us for options, which have all been things we've discussed, right? We've talked about the potential, the pros and cons of adding mobile units. We've talked about, year-round conversion of other schools. We've talked about a lot of ideas that just really haven't been determined to be maybe, feasible. So just trying to be creative with
Right.
a new campus being built right next to it. I'm just trying to
Is
make
there-
sure
is
that
there
we
anything-
explore
yeah.
our options, because,
No, absolutely.
if adding them isn't a permanent solution if they be moved to the middle school, but maybe there's the hope that we could get class size legislation
Right.
reversed or mitigated or some waivers within a few
Right.
years, right? Or there's the chance that maybe with additional school bonds and school construction, there could be, an additional campus in sort of that West Cary, Morrisville area built. It is just kicking the can down
Yeah.
the road. I fully admit that, but it's just trying to find a way to address this immediate
current need.
situation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Other things? Ms. Mappy?
Thank you. I thought Vice Chair Haggerty was going in a different direction of, given the crowding that we're seeing in this area, is both an option, to have the extended space, but also be prepared for mobiles should the need arise, given the crowding that we see and knowing the land restrictions we have and what, Ms. Parker went through to even find this land for a middle school, high school combo. I don't know. It's almost something that I wonder that we have to look at if that's feasible for the site, given the land restraints and the miracles needed to happen in order to find land in this part of Wake County.
Right.
So to that point, though, is the trailer space and the mobile space and where you might build the extra capacity, I was just going back to look at.
Yeah, can they coexist?
Weren't they on the same footprint area, or are they different places?
No, so adding the capacity would make a third floor on that wing, the
Make a
middle
third
school
floor
wing.
on the wing,
That's
gotcha.
right. We would add our 5 general classrooms and a
Yeah.
science room on the third floor.
So technically, you could do both. But then,
Technically,
as
yes.
we'll see later on, that one of our requirements for the mobile units is that they be within 300 feet of the entrance to the school. And so if you have elementary school over there, then the question would be, would the elementary school come in and use the core facilities of the middle school? Or would you have to go all the way over to the elementary school? So that, again, we have to think creatively because we need space, no question.
I was just thinking of the context of a middle school in Morrisville, right? Like just knowing the growth that is happening in that area and you know, as more density comes, more people come, and so being able to accommodate that, so, you know, we aren't having a capping conversation within 5 years. Now, we may still
Sure.
with this extra capacity, but just trying to think out loud and proactively now before we hit that point.
Right, and again, to that point, which is, you know, we got to be creative however we look at this. But if we did that, now you might have the land where you could have that extra space, but we would have to build the core capacity of the restrooms, of the
Yeah.
cafeterias, et cetera. So,
Right, and
Yeah.
that's kind of the grapple, right, that I'm curious about as we're
sure.
exploring this.
Any thoughts, feedback?
So if we did build the capacity in the building, or if we did it in mobiles, we would bring the core up to that capacity. So we would bring it up to the 1,400 capacity instead of the 12. Yep.
Ms. Cash?
Thank you. It's a great looking school. I have 3 questions. First one, you said something about a visual and performing arts area. Can you explain what that looks like?
Sure, that's, you mean like how we're
Yeah,
describing?
what does the design look like?
Oh, well,
Just a typical auditorium.
yeah, so it's just a typical auditorium that the middle school would use. And then we have the spaces for, you know, art and band and choral and dance.
Okay, so it's like a typical
Typical middle school.
traditional
Yes.
Yeah, it's our
school.
traditional.
Then this program, I don't know if we're at program discussion. Is there application into this early?
Right, it'd be one of the early colleges patterned after the Vernon Malone style, the
Okay,
Northern
so
Wake.
that's application,
Yeah,
but not into the middle school?
The middle school
No.
would have a base assignment
middle school would be
area.
base.
Okay. And so it wouldn't, performing arts is like the way you said it sounded like it was going to be a little more enhanced. And so again, this might be an area that we're drawing to some of our programmatic magnet performing arts. I just want to be sure it wasn't in competition.
Right.
Oh, no.
Thank you. Okay.
No, programmatically, as we've discussed, these would be entirely separate schools. But building some high school space here allows us to have the full early college with Wake Tech. Wake Tech did not have space to have the full contingent of 400 students on the Wake Tech campus. And so this allows us to utilize one piece of property to expand both programs. Right. So I really like and I'd like to hear a little bit more about it, the idea of, and I understand it's sort of in development of kicking around the ideas, but the building space to potentially use later. So we potentially put a third floor on, presumably just rough it out. How do you see the likely cost compared to building a trailer? I mean, I think in some respects, I don't know. This option might make more sense than what we've done at a couple of the other schools, where we're going ahead and fully finishing those additional spaces. If we fully finish the additional spaces, then they're going to get used right away for programmatic purposes. Then when you need them from capacity, you're going to have that difficult tug-of-war to sort of pull it back for capacity space. So in some respects, this idea makes a lot more sense to say, you know, here's the shell that we can come back and deal with. The downside is it's just a shell, we have to come back and deal with it. And so, you know, would you do the renovation? Presumably it would be over summer, unless it's a multi-track year-round campus. And then you don't have a summer to finish it out. So, I mean, I like the idea, but I'd like to hear just a little bit more of the pros and cons and thinking behind it.
So I just wanted to provide some maybe some clarity and some additional information. These are options for flexibility.
Right.
And so the mobile units are pretty clear cut. What they have done is they have tasked the architect and the CM to look at the option of building additional permanent classroom space in at some point in time. Now, what that means for us now, we don't have to build it now, but what that means is there would be things that we would have to do to the building now, structural issues, concrete, things like that. So what we're doing is costing out what that option could mean. So we would prepare the structure and everything associated with it now, in the eventuality that if we wanted to go back at some point in time in the future, then we could go back and build those additional classroom spaces. We don't have those cost numbers yet. And so our charge has been, let us get the numbers, let us work with student assignment, let's determine what's needed, and then let's decide if the budget can stand it. And so we're really at that preliminary stage, but this effort was to really talk about the flexible capacity exercise. So our next step will be to see if we can even afford the infrastructure that could support the classrooms at some point in time in the future.
So, and I think I hear that. So you're talking about, making sure it's foundation, but it's foundation on top of 2 stories is there, rather than necessarily building the shell to go
Exactly.
back and finish.
Yes.
But it strikes me that might be yet another option if the cost structure could handle it, because then if you built the shell, it would be easier to turn shell into usable space than to go ahead and build the shell and do the upfit.
I think it's fair to say everything is on the table at
Sure.
this point in time, and we'll look at the options and figure out what's the most cost-effective and what is needed, too.
Right. No, well, thanks for the creative thinking. I think that's exactly what we need to be doing. I think we all know that the trailers are kind of our least favorite because these temporary classrooms we have almost no experience of them being temporary. And yet what do we do instead? Because we need the capacity. Okay, capping is least favorite, trailers next. We're with you, yeah. Okay. Any other comments or questions? No, I think you've done another great job of, we talked about this at our last meeting, about sometimes those challenged spaces end up giving us really neat outcomes. And I think you're showing that again. I mean, we would not pick this site if we had our druthers. But in the end, I think it will turn into a very beautiful space.
Make it work. Yeah,
So,
thank you.
all right, do you need anything else from us other than
I
looks
think
good, keep going?
Yeah, looks good. Keep going.
Very good.
All right.
All right.
All right, thank
you all.
you.
And double check, do not see any hands online. All right. The next item on our agenda is the long-range student membership forecast. Another non-trivial issue. Read that magic ball, right? Read the magic crystals.
Good afternoon, Superintendent and board members. Thank you for allowing us some time to come and share the student membership forecast. Today in person we have with us Ms. Michelle Vendito, who is our Wake County Government Budget and Management Services Director. Virtually, we have Ms. Wei Gu, who is a research analyst with Carolina Demographics. We also have Ms. Sandra Honeycutt, who is the Director of Student Information Systems with Wake County Public School System. We have Ms. Sharon Peterson, our Wake County Government Long Range Planning Administrator. We have Mr. Aaron Brown, our Wake County Government Senior Budget and Management Analyst. Not able to join us today are Ms. Rebecca Tibbett, who's also with Carolina Demographics, and other Wake County Public School System and Wake County government staff members who support this effort. We are grateful for their hard work and their support of this effort. We want to note that NCDPI has verified the Wake County Public School System's district average daily membership, month 2, increased by 1,087 students for the 2021-22 school year. Our total average daily membership, month 2, was 158,760 students. This number is different from the number that you're going to see reflected in the forecast, which we'll explain in a few minutes. We want to remind you that the last 3 years introduced the idea of significantly fewer school-age children in the coming years, regardless of where they choose to attend school. That theme is repeated this year, as we note a slower birth rate than years past, but a small but steady increase in Wake County. We also want to reiterate that the unpredictability of when and where charters will open in Wake County continues to make it difficult for the county and the school system and its partners to predict school growth. I think, Catherine, if we could switch the ball to Betty Parker for the PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's on the WebEx. We just need to get on the screens.
Oh, okay.
There it comes.
Awesome. Thank you. We're on slide 2. We want to take a moment to explain who is involved in creating the projections and how they are made. Data is collected from the Wake County Public School System, Wake County planners, the municipal planning agencies, and Carolina Demography at UNC Chapel Hill to develop forecast data. On this team, the school district is primarily responsible for providing student membership counts and data related to membership trends. Wake County is primarily responsible for providing economic and demographic data and information on trends. Slide 3. This slide provides some detail about how that information is used. The process begins when the school district provides the average daily membership figures at the end of the second month, also referred to as PMR2 or Principal's Monthly Report 2. This information is combined with historic membership data and planning data so the forecast team can develop new projections. Data is adjusted annually to reflect changes in membership, birth rates, school-age residents, and parental choice. Historically, we have used the terms membership and ADM and enrollment interchangeably. During any typical year, the enrollment numbers are higher than the average daily membership. As our team shared with you last year, the effects of COVID on student attendance further exacerbated the difference between the two numbers. We used month 2 average daily membership data for the forecast. With that context in mind, the 10-year forecast was made using the following assumptions and parameters. 1, COVID continues to have an impact on student membership and enrollment. Attendance violations reduced from a 2020-21 high, but did not return to the pre-COVID-19 levels this school year. Kindergartners who did not enroll for the 2020-21 school year did not all return and enroll for kindergarten and first grade in the 2021-22 school year. Enrollment in alternative schooling options, i.e. homeschools, charters, and private, have continued to be in flux. The Wake County economy remains strong, and that there was an increase in live births that will impact membership, and we will expound on that topic a little bit at a later slide. The global pandemic caused by COVID-19 is an unprecedented event with no equivalent historical point of reference. We saw significant disruptions to trends at the start of the 2020-21 school year, and these disruptions have continued through the 2021-22 school year. Compared to the other largest school districts in the state, WCPSS had smaller relative membership losses in 2020-21. During 2021-22, WCPSS saw a modest gain in membership. As you see in this graph, membership has varied this school year for the other large school districts, with some seeing significant increases compared to the prior school year and others seeing significant decreases. Before we go into detail about the projections for the future, we wanted to offer some important background data and some updated information for perspective. Each year, a school district's average daily membership is taken from the second month of the school year. This graph gives you an idea of how our numbers compared pre-COVID in 2019-20, last year, and this year. As you see in column 3, our month 2 ADM for this year shows an average membership of 158,760 students, which is an increase from the previous year's month 2 ADM. Column 4 shows a snapshot of our actual enrollment about 2 weeks ago, which reflects approximately 1,500 students more than the month 2 number. It is important to note that we must provide seats for each student that's enrolled, not just the students that are covered in the average daily membership. As we shared last year, we felt that one of the consequences of COVID-19 was an abnormal spike in attendance violations. This year's attendance violations were higher than the pre-pandemic level, but significantly lower than the increase we experienced last year. WCPSS had 442 enrolled students in violation of attendance policies for month 2 for the 2021-22 school year. In prior years, the number of students in violation ranged from 121 to 166, averaging about 138 per year. Current violations are 304 students higher than that average, but 906 students below the violations we experienced for 2020-21. Since we felt that these violations are still having a significant impact on our forecast, we once again normalized the 158,760 ADM number to 159,066 students to reflect our usual much lower number of attendance violations. For analysis and forecasting purposes, we will be using the normalized number to account for the spike in attendance violations. It's the closest apples-to-apples comparison that we could establish as we look ahead. The data here is based on our Wake County charter billing and the data reported to for home and private schools from the Division of Non-Public Education at the NC Department of Administration. Yes, that's a mouthful. Wake County charters, home schools, and private schools experienced enrollment growth. Information on the number of students that moved to homeschool or private for this year will not be known until July of 2022, when the 2021-22 data is released by NCDOA. This data will be used in future years' projections. Wake County charter school membership grew by 763 students, or 4.7% in 2021-22 compared to 2020-21. This is similar to the statewide growth rate in charter membership, which was approximately 4.5%. Wake County charter membership increased most significantly in middle schools, grades 6 and 7, followed by elementary grades, particularly 1st and 3rd. At high school, the high school level, Wake County charter school membership decreased for all grades except for 10th. The charter applications provide projected enrollment numbers, but final numbers are not confirmed until closer to the time that the school year starts. Between the application process and the school's opening, schools are permitted to amend their projected enrollment numbers or request delayed openings. Charter schools may not open unless they have enrolled at least 75% of their projected year one ADM. It is anticipated that 3 new charters will impact WCPSS in the 2022-23 school year. Another charter has not completed the approval process for the following year and therefore has not been included in these forecast projections. As we mentioned, it's difficult to predict how many charters will actually open based on recent history. The impact of charters continues to be a fluid situation and one that we continuously monitor.
Economic indicators in Wake County remain strong. Wake County's unemployment rate has been consistently lower than the state's average. Both Wake County and North Carolina's unemployment rates increased significantly in April and May during the first coronavirus lockdown and have since declined to pre-COVID levels. As of October 2021, Wake County's unemployment rate was 3%, similar to the unemployment rate in February 2020 of 2.9 before the onset of the pandemic. So Wake continues to have a strong economy as we move out of the pandemic, hopefully. Next, Betty. This chart helps illustrate the importance of the birth rate on long-range forecasts. The yellow line shows kindergarten membership in the Wake County Public School system. The pink line shows the number of births 5 years earlier, so you can see the correlation between the two. Between the years 2015-16 and 2019-20, the average birth to kindergarten ratio was 0.938, or really 93%. The ratio for 2021 decreased to 81%. If historical ratios had held in 2021-22, WCPSS would have expected 12,212 kindergartners. Instead, there were 11,233 enrolled. For the current school year, the birth to kindergarten ratio rebounded to 86% in 2021-22, but this was still below the historical averages. As kindergarten is not mandatory, parents may be withholding children from kindergarten or homeschooling during the pandemic challenges, which was something we discussed last year. Birth rates for the 2007 and prior, which are reflected by the peak seen in 2012-13, increased year over year by as much as 4%. Since then, birth rates have either decreased or increased only moderately. A combination of prior live births and actual kindergarten membership and the projected increase for 2021-22 both impact the grade progression ratios used to forecast this grade level membership forecast. We assumed births will continue to grow, reflecting overall strong population growth in Wake County. Next slide. Forecasts are just that, forecasts. They are based in part on past behaviors, so when the behavior changes, so does the forecast. When last year's forecast was developed, the team aimed to predict the changes in events spurred by the COVID-19 pandemic, but could not guarantee its effect on birth rates, residential migration patterns, or school choice. The updated forecast reflects both the updated short and long-term impacts of those variables. To orient you to this slide, the turquoise uppermost line is the forecast presented 2 years ago, pre-pandemic. The green bottommost line is the forecast presented last year with pandemic inputs, and the navy blue middle line is the current forecast. As in previous years, this slide continues to represent shifts made to the forecast. The forecast team annually reviews new data, conducts error analysis, analyzes trends, and adjusts the forecast accordingly. These adjustments are based on data collected and received and made in response to existing and new trends. WCPSS memberships enrollments are projected to increase slightly in 2022 to just above their 2021 level. Subsequent years in the forecast continue this slight growth trend until an expected drop in enrollment in 2025-26 caused by a large cohort of students aging out of school and a smaller cohort of kindergartners aging into school. The forecast then projects consistent increasing growth driven by projected increasing live births in 2026-27 through 2031-32. Over the next 10 years, this forecast would see an addition of approximately 6,000 students.
As broader context among these changes is worth remembering that the overwhelming majority of families attend the Wake County Public School System. Predicting growth in any given year is challenging, but it is even more difficult under these unprecedented circumstances. We are continuing to predict that public schools will continue to enroll an overwhelming majority of students in Wake County. Continued investment in school construction, facility improvements, and programmatic classroom enhancements remain vital to attracting over 75% of families to the Wake County Public Schools. As the team finalized the forecast, the assumptions that we outlined earlier still leave us with some questions regarding the membership and enrollment challenges. Number one, how many missing students, and that's referring to the how many missing students will return to school, which refers to the significantly reduced enrollments in WCPSS that are not fully accounted for by increases in homeschool, charter schools, or private schools. Will 2022-23 be post-pandemic? How much will school choice, like homeschooling, made during the pandemic persist into the future, and for how long will that continue? How well will charter applications capture true build-out? In Wake County, as in statewide, the decrease in public school membership and enrollments was not fully offset by the increased enrollments in other school systems. In any year, there are challenges in making projections, but this year and last year have been particularly challenging due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is very hard to predict the response coming out of the pandemic, and we may continue to see a flux well into the 2022-23 school year and beyond. In today's handouts, you will find a summary memo, a detailed report of the new forecast that provides data sources and other information, and a copy of this presentation. We'll be happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you. And the floor is open for questions. I do encourage my colleagues, if you haven't had a chance to do so, to look at that detailed report. There's a lot of really good information in there. Ms. Cash.
I'm sorry, my question may be answered in the detailed report. So on slide 10, you talk about a market share based on the county. Do you have it broken down into the parts of the county or by districts? What % market share is not choosing Wake County Public Schools?
I'm sorry.
Does slide 10, what does slide 10 tell me?
It's across the county. It's not broken down into the
Do you
regions.
have the information broken down?
I can double check and I'll get back to you with that answer.
Thank you.
It's not in the report, but that should be,
Oh, it's not in the report?
not that I can remember.
Right.
Yeah.
It might be good to look at, since I've been reviewing a lot of the marketing done by the charter schools, and it's there's a lot of enhancement driven by facility because that's more what they can hang their hat on, I guess. And it'd be good to see how that's impacting us in the market share by the schools' enhancements.
There is a map of where the charter schools are located, and with sort of bubble graphs to show.
So that has the
to show
forecasted ones as well?
I'm sorry?
That has the ones that are coming online?
Yes.
I think so, yeah. And it has a bubble in terms of sort of how, the size of the enrollment. And you, I mean, you know what it looks like. You can see where they're
Yeah.
distributed. And well, we don't have the specific information you're talking about. One can get a pretty good idea based on.
I don't
where
want to
they
do
are.
that. I want them to help me do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I know you're really good at that, Ms. Mahaffey, of looking at a map and pulling it out. I just want the information if possible.
Yeah.
And
Thanks.
may I clarify really quickly? That map shows the charters that have opened through this school year. Because we don't know until right up until the last minute whether or not the ones we are anticipating opening next year, those are not yet in that graph, in the
Right.
map that we're referencing.
But you do know what, so when you're looking at the markets here, do you know what percent is coming out of each area of the county or not?
I think we should be able to find that
Okay,
information
thanks.
for you.
Thanks. Sorry, Ms. Mahaffey, I just,
No, I get what you're saying, and I think that this map answers some questions, but it doesn't answer, the
Exactly.
important question is, where are we losing the students in market share?
Ms. Carter.
Thank you. I guess for me, I was a little concerned about slide 8, actually a lot of concerned about slide 8. That's attendance violations. And I guess for me, because I know we still have, we're just a little over halfway through this year. So we're still at, almost 3 times the pre-COVID average. And kind of a little bit more, I was wanting more detailed information about that, if we know where that's occurring, if it's more at the high school level, middle school level. And I know there are things being done, but I'm just trying to get a sense on, are this multiple, does this mean per kid? Or is this, like, do you count every single, like if one child has multiple, are they counted? Does that make, I don't know if each time, or is it every single time? And then just a little more information about that and where that's headed, because, at the end of the school year, I'm looking, if we continue on the rate we're at, we'd be pretty high, because we've got quite a bit more time left. And that's a huge concern about what's happening with these violations, and if there's any known reasoning behind them, that would be helpful as well. I don't know if we have that or not.
And thank you so much for that question. We actually have Miss Sandy Honeycutt
Okay.
online,
Okay.
and I think she's still logged in. I can't see the WebEx right now. She may be able to provide an answer for that for us. And if not, we'll.
And Ms.
get
Carter,
that.
just to make sure that we got what you're asking, first, maybe an understanding of what an attendance violation it is, like a definition, operational definition. And second, do we know when they are happening and who they are happening with? By grade levels, time of year, that sort of thing.
I would be
Well, isn't this something where I'm sorry, Ms. Mahaffey, we have a language issue, because if you're not present, that I think is called an attendance violation, even if it's an excused absence, I think, because isn't the attendance violation basically the deduction from the ADM?
That you're not here.
It just means that you're not here. So attendance violation makes it sound like you're in violation of something. But if you're out sick, isn't that considered an attendance violation? From an ADM perspective.
Marcella, are you ready for me to speak?
Yes, that'd be very
Yes,
helpful.
thank you, Sandy.
Absolutely. And we may have, excuse me, we may have some clarification that we just need to just make sure we're all on the same page. Marcella, I believe the information that you got on this slide was from the second month PMR, the number of violations, attendance violations for this school year as well as previous school year from the month 2 PMR. A student is considered to be in an attendance violation when they miss 10 consecutive days of school. they tend to be a little higher around the first part of the school year, especially within the last 2 years. We had issues, as we all know, with COVID and students not attending, students not necessarily logging in remote. Students, it does tend to clear up as we go through the school year. This is a point that Michael Pesch, a director in counseling and student services, is aware of and is working on. These are the students that we are always working to make certain that we've got attendance letters sent out, that we've got any sort of court follow-up that needs to be done. It is information that we can get a little more defined around particular schools that might be having issues. If that's information that you would like, we could get that together for you based on the PMR and present that.
These are also the kids that are on the list that school counselors and school social workers are doing follow-up with, as well as teachers, even to the extent that, a kid who's in virtual academy, who's not doing well, where the teacher will contact the counselor and the family about coming back to school. But there are a number of things that are happening with these students, and I think we've talked about that a little bit in a previous agenda. We could certainly bring that back.
Maybe a work session or a
That's
student
correct.
achievement.
Ms. Carter?
I think then, too, that's, because this is one snapshot, so that's got me even more concerned about what's happening. I guess that'd be a different conversation, but sounds like we still are having significant attendance issues, and for me, that is a real concern. So I would like more information, not only about this snapshot here, but also overall what's happening as we are a little over halfway through the school year compared to previous school years, because it's still quite high for me.
Well, and to that point, I think it's really important that we get some of the why behind
Yes.
it, right? Is it a health concern? Is it a struggling with material concern? Is it a what concern?
Right.
So I don't know if that's accessible or not, but that's almost more of an academics issue. But if we could get any of the why behind this, that would sure be helpful.
Yeah, because for me, that could then end up impacting what we're talking about here, the membership, because that leads possibly to losing students and families in our system. So that would be helpful. So.
Mr. Haggerty?
Thank you. So, Ms. Roy, I do want to circle back to something that I always like to cover when we have these discussions, because I think as a reminder, all of these projections are about net growth, correct? And so we'll still see large population gains in some parts of the county, and then other areas of the county where population is declining. Is that correct?
That is the correct statement, and thank you so much for making that comment. That's one of the things that Mr. Carosa and I had commented on recently. It's like, as we've been seeing people pop up, someone who was in Eastern Wake that's now in Western Wake, someone that was in Northern that's now in Central. I mean, during the pandemic and during the changes with our economic changes with housing, people have literally just been popping all over the place, for lack of a better descriptor.
Thanks. And I think that's important, because whether it was our last discussion when we're talking about capping and school population and the number of schools expected to rise, you look at that and if you hear, but if enrollment's going down, how can that be? Right? And I think it's just important to remind everybody that some areas of the county, we're seeing continued growth and we're seeing new developments going up and more projected growth, where in other areas, whether it's school choice, whether it's birth rates or whatever reasons, we are seeing that go down. So, and then I also had a question, and this, I looked through the formal report, but I didn't really see this in terms of methodology. If we could look at slide 14. So this is the one, membership is forecast to increase starting in 2026 due to an increase in live births, right? And if I follow the logic here, if we know how many new children have been born in the area in 2020, 2021, 2022, you can forecast how old they would be at kindergarten age and then see, predict how many would be coming to our schools. But I notice here we have this large spike that starts around 2027, but then I guess 2028, 29, 30, much higher than we were forecasting in 19 and definitely in the other direction than what we were forecasting in 20. If those, again, you go 4 or 5 years back, those are still years into the future where these are babies that have not yet been born. So where are we coming up with that projection?
And I think I mentioned at the beginning that Ms. Rebecca Tibbett with Carolina Demography was unable to be here with us, but that's some of the data that they use and just across the country based off of what trends have happened during the Great Recession and other milestones whenever we've had major events. That's the trend that they've seen going forward. And we battled with that particular slide because it looks like a huge swoop. And if you'll notice the numbers over to the left, it's not a huge change. Thank you for pulling that back up. Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Well, also, as part of the discussion today, the live births, last year and previously, I think more recently, there's been discussion about certain age cohorts growing more in Wake County than others. Under 18 had been growing at a slower pace. They still are, but the data for this year, for the first 6 months of births, was larger than it had been for maybe the last 5 years. So just applying pandemic babies to the forecast is a relatively significant just portion of that change. And
Okay.
as Marcella said, yeah, I would say, I was like, we got to make sure we understand the factors going into this. And then just in terms of, why 2026, there's also with this grade progression ratio that all of the past also is feeding in. So those lower births are impacting the earlier years, and these later, more recent births impact the later years.
Okay, thank you. And as Ms. Mahaffey just pointed out to me kind of off the record, the total number of students you're projecting may not be that stark an increase as maybe just the slope of that line might look if it's only 2,500, 500,000 students out of 150, 160,000. It's not quite as dramatic.
It's less than 1%.
Okay, thank you.
So as somebody who works with data all the time, look at your y-axis, because your brain wants the bottom of the y-axis to be 0. It's not. The bottom of the y-axis is 155,000. So that's part of it. The other thing is note that this only goes back to 2019, and we're right now in 2022. So that means you've got sort of 3 years of real data. We can project based on the birth weight rates, so that can take you out to 27. I think that this slope is probably too steep, would be my guess. But I bet if you looked at this in a projection going back in time 10 to 20 years, I bet you're going to see that this curve overall is just meeting that historic trend. So you're going to get some waves, right? Just like the little spike you see at 24 looks significant on this plot, but I bet if you looked at it over 20 years, you're going to just see that consistent trend. So I think a lot of this is just how the graph was plotted, not what the data is actually telling us.
Appreciate that.
Ms. Maffey.
Dr. Martin, I'm wondering if going forward, as we're looking at, at our last facility meeting, we talked about capping, we talked about the impact of K-3 class size and loss of seats and how that has impacted our schools that are needing to get capped. And then looking to see, where people are settling, whether it's new growth or overturning of existing homes. I think that helps feed what we're looking for as far as forecasting where we're building, where we're renovating, and what we're going at, not just the charter school piece. I think that's also very important, but I think maybe a deeper dive into what it means, not just for the district overall as far as enrollment, but what we can see or, try to forecast looking forward as we're building and anticipating how long a cap will be on a school, for example.
So am I almost hearing that you'd like input from, I think it was the Chapel Hill group, right? Because you all feed, both the county and the school system feed data in, and then the Chapel Hill group helps make these predictions. And I think what you're looking for is a little bit more understanding of that process. Is that?
It could be. It
Are you
could
looking
be.
at sort of demographics 101 like we've done Trailers 101 and Primp 101 and what?
I mean, I don't know if I would, sure, we can call it that. It's really understanding. So as we're talking to people, especially, where we have capped schools, right, and that high growth for the area of the district that I represent, explaining to folks like, well, yes, we see that this trend is dropping. We see that it's lower, but this is how your child's school or your area schools are impacted. And this is how we're working to deal with it. I think just being able to explain it proficiently for the different areas that we represent, whether it's, charter impact, whether it's growth in the area and higher density housing, I think is helpful as we communicate with people that live in the areas that we represent.
If I may make one comment on this as well, one of the things that you've heard us mention during several presentations is that part of this process, our NC State consultant, ITRI, we also meet with every municipality. So we already know short-term, the next 7 years, how much residential growth we're going to have. The next 20 years, how much residential we're anticipated to have. And we do those updates annually. So if all of a sudden someone inherits a bunch of money and they decide to plop a new subdivision in the middle of yours, then we know about that and we get those updates regularly. Now, one of the challenges in dealing with that, and several of the meetings and our CIP team, et cetera, we've talked about recently, is we forecast that this type of residential in this particular residential area will produce X number of children. But as Ms. Vendito said a few minutes ago, it's a forecast. So one particular area where we were anticipating having this bump in children, they didn't make the babies. So that particular area, it did not grow as we had anticipated. So we do have another team, which is part of the forecast process, which is through NC State, where we go through, we meet with those municipalities, we get that data, and then go through the process of determining this is where and we also feed in all of our crowding data. So long-range planning sends over to NC State ITRI every year. This is where this school is as far as their crowding numbers. This is their capacity. This is how many students. So they have that information for a good 10 years, and they can use that information for those predictions as well.
Great.
So I've jotted that down. We need to think about that. But I think the bigger question, that it's one of those education things, right? How do we understand the differential demographics? Here we've got countywide data. County is not the same all over the place. How does that impact our planning? Ms. Cash.
So I'm just, as this, I don't know if I can format this question that it makes sense, but in my mind, it makes sense. But as we're looking at the prediction of population increase in our students, and they're not necessarily leaving to go somewhere, they're moving to another part of the county, then that affects our CIP plan, because if we're going to build new schools for those students going to the west, which is leaving empty seats in the east or the middle or other places, then are we going to consolidate some schools in those areas? Because I don't know that's not a popular question, but if we're going to keep building new schools, we can't leave empty seats, obviously. I mean, because if renovation's part of it, but secondly, a school with 58% enrollment next to two other schools with 58% enrollment, there needs to be some other discussions happening there. And it's not a popular conversation, but if that is, in fact, we're building a building, then we need to talk about structure, not just programmatic changes.
I think you raise an interesting point that maybe it becomes part of all this discussion that we need to know, and that's where student assignment is going to need to come in, is I think it's a very good question. what student assignment pressures are from intra-county movement and what student assignment pressures are coming from inter-county movement. And I don't know that we readily have that. I suspect that's something that would not be terribly difficult to run, Glenn?
We do have some in-county migration numbers that we can share and look at the out-of-county growth, new enrollments and such, that we could prepare some sort of report for you.
So
Okay.
I'll put the, we talk about new business every time as, what do we want to be looking at? We've got a number of things going on right now, trying to get the CIP and the renovations and all that. But the latter half of the year is when we have time to do some of these more deeper dive information gathering. And so we'll put that on as a topic for a deeper dive. Any other questions?
Dr. Martin.
Yes, I'm sorry, Heather.
Heather, that's okay.
Yep.
No, that's all right. Thank you. I appreciate the flexibility to be virtual today as we're juggling calendars. So everybody's healthy, but we're just juggling a lot. So thank you. I've got just a few questions. Could you please let me know whose responsibility it is, and forgive me for not knowing this, to locate school-age children and determine whether or not they're in school? For example, if it, making sure a child is accounted for either in a homeschool setting or public school setting, how does that work?
It would be best to have that question answered by somebody from Student Support Services, but if it depends on if we know they're there, right? So, for example, special ed in the child find process connects with the local health department, pediatricians, those kinds of folks, where they are able to follow up on students who might have needs that we're required to serve through special education services. We know about some students through our pre-K connections as well, with the programs that we serve out in actual private daycare centers where we might serve some 3 or 4 year olds, and then also, of course, our own pre-K services that we have and the people that apply and that sort of thing. But if we don't have some sort of a connection to them, either through pre-K services or child find, I don't know that we necessarily would know they are there. And that's why we run those massive kindergarten enrollment campaigns to get families in. But I would want to defer the remaining part of that answer that I'm not 100% sure about to our folks in Student Support Services to see if there's anything additional they can add.
I appreciate that. I just wasn't quite sure how that worked. So I wasn't sure if we did have students unenroll from the Wake County public school system. Of course, those parents are supposed to, have their child enrolled somewhere. If it's a homeschool, there's a process for that, but I wasn't sure who sort of monitors that or watches that. Have any discussions taken place with the state about the challenges of charter schools not really working with the local school systems in terms, I know we're allowed to write an impact letter that can be submitted to the Charter School Advisory Board for their consideration. But I don't know that that's ever really impacted their decision on whether or not they approve a charter school, despite school systems having said, wait, this is really going to impact us. And knowing that we're working collectively with taxpayer money to operate our schools, do we anticipate any sort of discussion or sort of a coming together moment happening just for smarter planning?
And who are you anticipating would be part of that coming together?
Local school districts talking with, either the State Board of Education or the Department of Public Instruction, something to, along with speaking to, legislators, that the way things are working right now it does create challenges, and it does sometimes, unintentionally cause enrolled schools. If we put up 5 schools where we really only have enough students, school-aged children living in that base to fill maybe 2 schools, then, that's, I don't think that's the best way to handle it. I mean, I was just wondering if that is ever discussed, if there's ever been an opportunity to discuss that, to try to address it, either with a change in policy.
There are conversations happen at superintendent's meetings across the state, the quarterly meetings that we have with our state superintendent, other opportunities through the RESAs, which are regional superintendents associations. And the subject of charter schools is a topic of discussion, whether it's clarification or advocacy or questions or concerns. But I've not seen a discussion about that occur outside of superintendents engaging directly with folks at DPI, I don't like boards, for example, or, okay. So, that's something that maybe it's something the School Board Association could take on in terms of advocating or providing a platform for that type of discussion or discourse. It does happen between superintendents and DPI.
Okay. I appreciate that. I mean, it seems to be a problem that continues, but even looking at the numbers of where the options, families have chosen options outside of the Wake County Public School systems, it looks like the biggest growth over the last year was in homeschools. That's why I was also curious, how is our state, are we, how are we monitoring, making sure that all of our school-age children are enrolled in some type of schooling. And I did want to add to Ms. Carter's question and the discussion that was around the attendance violations. I did want to share with you that when speaking with student support services at the high school level, I think that it might be valuable to pull in our counselors in getting an understanding of why why sometimes at the high school level, students are not at school. And what I've heard is, I know this is very sensitive, but what I've heard sometimes is that if it's not going to impact their grade in any way, there's no incentive for some students to stay in school. And believe me, I understand the board's work, the work of the school system, and trying not to have any kind of, punishing a student for things that are out of their control. But I did just want to share that I think that the high school counselors, in particular, school counselors, would be a great resource in trying to get a handle of the why we might see attendance violations at that age group. And those were my questions.
Thank you for that. I think I did mention the counselors earlier, as well as the social workers. They're all part of that process. But I think in particular the question also that you sort of raised about the impact of an attendance, of being absent on academics, and the extent to which that plays into the choices that a student might be making.
Thank you for those questions. All right, I think we could keep going on that topic for quite a while, but we also do need to look at the capital planning assumptions. So I think we'll go ahead and table this conversation for now. I mean, not really table. We've got the input. These are the numbers that will go forward. We need to understand how this is going to impact the budget. And this is where, we often talk about per capita numbers. That can get us into trouble in times when numbers decline or are stagnant because needs are going up. And so we need to be really careful in understanding these numbers and how we work with these numbers as we work with the budget. And we look forward to working together with our county partners in meeting the school's needs. So thank you. And Michelle, thank you particularly for coming. All right. The next item on our agenda is to look at the draft program assumptions and cost model update as part of our whole annual CIP review.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all again this afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to share some updates and information with you all. We'll just wait for just a moment for this slide deck to come up. All right. So we're here this afternoon to provide you an update on a couple key items that, as you all know, we annually work through this process, the CIP process, and provide updates in several key areas. This afternoon, we're going to update you on the assumptions, our LEGS design guidelines and space standards, and then provide a cost model update. Looking at specifically with respect to the assumptions and the other updates prior to cost model, we'll take a quick look at the updated process and schedule, those assumptions, of course, and then the update that we're here to provide you on the LEGS design guidelines and the space standards. Quick reminder just to share, the CIP committee during this time of the year, we do meet every 2 weeks. As you can appreciate, there's a lot of material for us to review and discuss. This is a snapshot at the key members that are parts of our CIP team and other key stakeholder groups that we consult with as we go through this process annually. Looking at our schedule and deliverables that we shared with you a couple of months ago, we do want to share that under the school prioritization bar, which is in the center of the section in blue, we are continuing to work through that and analyze the very beginnings of the data and the information that we're getting back from our consultants. We do believe that we'll be able to bring you some degree of a rough framework and update in our meeting next month in March, with the opportunity certainly to hear feedback and questions that you might have initially, and then come back to you all in the month of April with any additional changes or modifications per final data and recommendations. Everything else that we have here in our schedule has held from the last time that we had the opportunity to present this schedule to you all. And we do know that at some point in the month of March, there's been discussion about a joint meeting between both boards. Okay, moving on to our assumptions. As we were last with you, we did report that we were planning to spend the month of January as a team, our CIP team, working through our draft assumptions document. And what you see in front of you is a summary of some of the recommended updates that our team went through and discussed. The first section that we bring to you is in the technology section. And as we all know, during this pandemic, technology is critical. As you recall, last year we updated the language in the assumptions document to go from a 3-to-1 ratio to a 1-to-1 ratio for our students. In consulting with technology, they've suggested that this additional language be added with respect to connectivity, which we certainly understand is critical. We'd also like to just share that on more a broad-based schedule, that as we look at our flexible capacity, the approach with flexible capacity is ultimately to come to you all and provide you with more options, as was pointed out and stressed earlier this afternoon when our team shared the schematic design update for our combo school. And so we're finding that some of our sites, even majority of our sites, are having some site difficulties and even having difficulties perhaps placing the mobiles close enough to the schools. We ultimately want to provide school choice with multiple options to address capacity. That's our ultimate goal.
And there were 2 of these loaded, so I think some of us clicked on the wrong one. The correct one is the one that has your name on it?
Yes.
Okay, and it's lower down on the piece, so if
Okay.
you're looking
Apologies for
confused.
that.
Yeah, no, I'm just making sure we're all on the same page.
Okay. So as we talk about flexible capacity, the program assumptions, as you know, the in this particular section, they were referred to as trailers. And given the broad-based concept of thinking of more options that we have the ability to bring to you all, the suggestion is to modify that to flexible capacity, as that's indeed what we're really discussing. As we continue through these modifications, I think it's important to share a couple of other key points. There were no major changes made. I think that what we really wanted to do was, as a team, to clarify language in multiple areas of the document, and ultimately plan how it reflect how we plan to actually design as a team and as a school district. As we move forward, again, modification 6 is one that Dr. Martin brought up earlier in this meeting, and we want to be clear that when we talk about the walking distance from the mobiles, it is to an entrance of the building. We're being compliant with code, and we want to make sure that we're adhering to that. We're also ensuring that our mobile units are ADA compliant, and as you know, if there's a situation where one perhaps was done prior to ADA being a requirement that's grandfathered in, we are addressing it as the need arises.
So as you and I talked before the meeting, maybe we can add some of that ADA compliance language into this, I think might be a good idea.
Okay.
I'll send you the notes that we talked about.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly. As you can appreciate, in modification 7, that isn't certainly an ADA issue, but when you look at fire and EMS, those vehicles in particular need special consideration as it relates to accessibility on and off the site. So that was the suggestion in that particular case from our team. And then as we move on to modifications 8 and 9, which are in our safety and security section, we consulted with our security department, and they've made those particular recommendations. And I will pause there and ask if there are any specific questions in the assumptions. Mr. Haggerty.
Mr. Haggerty.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm the last point about safety and security. That would allow us to begin to implement some of the recommendations that came out of our safety and security audit. Isn't that right?
We understand that there were recommendations to be made, and I understand that that's something behind the scenes that we're still discussing, but the idea would be that it would be in concert with those.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
But you're absolutely right. And these is, one of the things that we have to recognize is these assumptions are largely for projects going forward. At the same time, they're an important lens for us to look at our current setting. And some of that language is in here, right? Particularly when we do renovations, we want to make sure we renovate up to our current standard. But that gives us, I think, eyes to look at some of our older facilities and say, hey, here's some areas where we need to work. So absolutely, it needs to interface with that audit. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, as we talked about a couple language edits that I think, we need some nouns with the going to flexible capacity, right? The options not include in original building, but we need classrooms included. So we'll deal with a couple of those kind of just grammatical things. But overall, the board is good with shifting from trailers to flexible capacity. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, very good.
Very good. Thank you. Moving on to our program standards, legs, and guidelines, that particular area, again, is one that our team behind the scenes, as you know, is reviewing annually during this process and spending the months leading up to this very meeting reviewing those items. What we'd like to point out is in previous years, there were some changes that did lead to cost impacts in our cost model, but specifically we'd like to note that in years 21 and now in 22, we're here to share that there are no recommended material changes to those items that would create changes to our CIP. And as you know, ultimately, no changes of significance is certainly equal to no cost impacts. Any questions or comments related to that particular section?
No, it's always good when we can be good stewards of taxpayer money, but hopefully the supply chain and market will get back along with us on that.
Well, I think we'll come to that, right? I mean, because the supply chain, right, just because there are no changes to the assumptions and the cost model doesn't mean that we're in the clear, because as you know, the supply chain issues are hitting us hard. So we'll come to that,
Certainly.
obviously.
Very good. As we move on, this is the timeline as we discussed that last month we were reviewing updates with you. This month as we sit here, and then next month we'll be bringing to you various recommendations with the goal as last year that we would be coming to you in April for your approval. And with that, happy to take any other questions or comments.
And we are coming to the cost update next, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Any other questions on the assumptions? You get a chance and you read through it and you see some things. I just will note, if you pull up the document that's probably still there, because once it's up, it needs to stay up, there were some track changes things that are there. Recognize that those have been caught and are being addressed. So there will be some edits to the document to clean it up. But if you find content things, please let Douglas know, let me know, or Mr. Strickland know, and we'll try to get those addressed. Okay?
Very good. And with that, Jack McAleer, who is our Director of Project Controls, is going to now share with you our cost model update for this year.
Thank you, Douglas. Wait for the control to pop up. Thank you. There it is. All right, can everybody see the presentation? At least on your screens, there it is. All right, thank you, Douglas. My name is Jack McAleer. I serve as the Director of Program Controls for FD&C, and I'm here today to share the update to the draft cost model as part of this year's CIP update. What we're going to cover today includes a brief overview of the model summary, process overview of the annual update, steps we go through, key areas, a market review of the trends we're seeing there and impacts as well, the CIP specific impacts, not only to project budgets, but also overall the CIP executive summary and funding, and then talk about next steps, where we go after this. All right, so just to start, for those of you not familiar, what is the cost model? Essentially, it is our construction estimate template that we use to build the budgets for our major projects. It includes major renovations and also new construction, the major projects of that nature. We also use it for the smaller projects, but it's more geared towards the larger ones that are called out individually in the CIP. The majority of it is driven by two cost drivers, which is the building dollar per square foot and the site dollar per acre. It's about 75% of the total cost, and that stays consistent year over year. Other areas include, design fees, demolition, different factors for renovation on existing campuses, soft cost, including third-party surveying, other inspections, things of that nature. There's also attached on the agenda for this a supplemental file entitled 2021 Target Cost Model Estimating Guide, which is last year's detailed file of the cost and some more insight into what the specifics are. That will be updated, obviously, once we get through this year's update. But looking at those prices on there, it does not reflect the escalation that we've experienced, and what we'll show going forward. So the annual update process is essentially we want to evaluate the cost accuracy. How accurate are our budgets compared to what our bid day prices are? So we can plan a predictable CIP and execute the CIP as intended. So we look at cost accuracy bid, projects that went under bid the previous year, program changes, market conditions, economic forecast looking forward. So it's a backwards look and a forward look. and the key activity areas are listed below. Evaluate the guidelines, program space standards for changes, any changes that come down from the state level that are mandated requirements. We look at previous year budget versus bid summaries, and also look at the projects that are currently under estimate to get trends, especially when we have years when we only have one or two projects that actually go out to bid. We need more data points. So we started bringing in the actual estimates for project in the design phase. This next slide you have seen before. It was a part of Douglas's previous presentation, but this is part of the annual cost model update. So we reviewed the program standards, legs, guidelines for any changes. There hadn't been any changes for 2021 or 2022, so no changes equals no cost impacts.
And again, for the public, interpret legs.
Legs is the learning environment and guidelines.
Right, thank you.
Okay.
We're full of acronyms around here, and it just periodically it's good to refresh.
Try and keep them to a minimum, but
that's right.
They're sprinkled throughout. So no changes, no cost impacts related to that area. That is not necessarily the case as we move forward into the market review. This is kind of the key focus of this year's update, as it has not only impacted prices at the grocery store, gas at pump, but also what we do here in construction. This slide is giving you a snapshot of kind of some of the key commodity price increases that we started seeing right around mid-year 2021 when the spike started. Increases of anywhere from 25% on the low side for asphalt. Some of these copper, steel, metal studs increased 50 to over 200% over the course of the last 12 to 18 months. Other impacts related to the market volatility is, material shortages and longer lead times, and uncertainty with those lead times when shops can actually fabricate items. How this translates, these commodity increases translates to our bid packages, if you will. We only had one project go under bid in 2021, but that's a good point. That was affected by the market volatility, and that was Woods Creek Elementary. And essentially, the four main bid packages that were most significantly increased account for 90% of the total overages, and that's the steel package, which was about 112% over what we were expecting to typically experience, so that's more than double. Roofing, exterior systems, and interior finishes, those two packages were about 60% over, and HVAC was about 13% over. So with those four bid packages, you're looking at about $5.7 million just for those four alone. All right, so why is all this happening? If you've been paying attention to the news at all, it's all relative. Demand has increased at a significant rate, higher than supply can keep up with. The 2020 shutdown, decrease in manufacturing and other economic activity, then fast forward to the 2021 rapid recovery, and also increase in construction activity and other activity that put a real stress on the global supply chain. That's led to scarcity of goods, labor shortages have contributed, truck driver shortages, other skilled trade shortages. People are just staying home. So all of this is factoring in to the market volatility and escalation that we're seeing. So the question is initially, is it transient or is it persistent? We rewind back to what we presented last year in the CIP update was the dip that we experienced in 2020 bids. We had 5 projects that were presented as part of that presentation. 3 were actually in 2020, and 2 are still shown here that were in 2021, at least the early stages. So those 5 came in significantly under budget for the most part. The 2 shown here, Fuller and Apex Elementary School, are in that grouping, but with this being 2021 evaluation, I included it here just for consistency. But when we want to talk about the market escalation and volatility, we got to look at Woods Creek as really the starting point which bid mid-year when all this started to take off. And total, that came in about $7.7 million over budget on bid day. And the bid packages I mentioned before were about $6 million of that. And that seems to be the trend we're seeing with those commodities and trades having the highest increase. With only one data point for 2021, in order to evaluate whether or not this is transient or it's going to be here for a while, we've included 4 projects below which are currently in design phase that will be bidding in the next 12 months. We got estimates. There are different phases within design phase. Some are 100% CD, some are at DD, and a couple at SD. The next one that we have bid is Fuquay-Varina Middle School, bidding in a couple months. Current estimates are showing that's going to be about $10.1 million over.
Can you go over CDDD, SD? For someone that doesn't live in that space all the time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's CD is construction documents. That's the final phase of the design phase. So it's the market volatility impact for this project is currently estimated at $10 million.
And so the definitions of DD and SD?
DD is design development. SD is schematic design. And so it goes schematic design, design development, 60% construction documents, 100% construction documents.
So it's how far along the project is, therefore you have a better understanding of how much the overage might be.
Correct. Yep. As the project matures, the estimates become more detailed and accurate. So we're seeing, what is there? 1, 2, 3 elementary schools and 1 middle school listed here with ranges of $5 million to $10 million over. That's consistent with all the other data points and stuff we're seeing with these projects spread out mid this year through first of 2023. So that last slide is the data that we're using to reconcile our budgets going forward with the cost model. We've evaluated that data and applied it to the escalation percentages in the model that actually change the budgets going forward. And what that looks like, the categories that we changed are highlighted in yellow. Biggest one being the 19% increase in building and 8% increase in site for 2022. That's going to take care of the majority of what we experienced with slight increases in 2023 to taper off until we get back to a stable market in 2024. There's no other changes outside of 2024, with all the forecasts saying volatility should subside around second quarter 2023, although that keeps changing. Forecasts tend to be a little volatile and rose-colored glasses, right? So,
And their forecasts, right?
and their forecasts, which are inherently uncertain. So that's how we're updating the budget. What that looks like from a unit rate perspective, the 2 biggest drivers. Give you a snapshot of where we were this time last year, where we thought we'd be with a building dollar per square foot of $212 versus what we experienced about $248. Site about $500,000 per acre in 2021 this time last year. It actually cost us $566,000. So let me move that. So the increases on the unit rates kind of track with the percentages we're seeing in the previous slides. We've only shown an elementary school here because simplicity for one, and the rates you'll see on a middle school and high school will be very similar, slightly better due to the economies of scale. I'm trying to keep the math to a minimum.
For the change in site costs, how much of that is because we're having to be, like, having sites that require more retention walls and what have you, and how much of that is market impact?
So this one was solely based off of Woods Creek Elementary. It did have some site impacts that were perhaps more abnormal if it was a flat site. I think a pond dam breach did have some retaining walls, if I remember, which would be incorporated in that. So it's a combination of both. The majority of the increases in volatility we're seeing is in the building packages versus the site.
Thanks.
Sure. All right, so moving on to kind of big picture, how this affects the CIP, specific projects, and the funding aspect of it. We got two pieces of the CIP to look at, the near term in FY22 and 23, and then also FY24, the out years that have not been funded yet. So for FY22 and 23, the county has already issued limited obligation bonds. The funding is locked in essentially. So any overages or anticipated overages for the budgets we got to find internally. So how are we doing that? We've got 6 major projects that has funding planned with appropriations through that time period. 4 new ones and 2 renovations, with the potential cost exposure for those 6 projects going out to bid ranging from $60 million to $85 million. So we got a plan for the worst, with hopefully expected costs will be somewhere in the middle with a normal distribution curve. So the funding, we've identified $86 million to cover those anticipated costs, at least worst case scenario. The buckets are included below, with $5 million from CIP 2013 savings. $13.4 million is coming from program contingency for those 2 years. $14.5 million is coming from project contingency buckets that are held within the projects listed above, but outside of the GMP. So this is essentially management reserve versus contingency that's held within the project budgets, intended for, changes on bid day, surprises on bid day, similar to how program contingency is. And so the balance of the identified funding is coming from other project savings at the $53.1 million. So here's how 2020 comes into play with how we're funding 2022. So we had 5 projects that went out to bid then that came in either at budget early or came in significantly under at bid day. And not only when bid day projects come in under budget, they also don't have to use their planned contingency for overages and things of that nature. So the savings is, I wouldn't say exponential, but it's fairly significant. So for those 5 projects, makes up about $36 million of that 53. I'm going to hit pause there. Any questions at that point? All right. A lot of numbers. Okay, so that's 22 and 23. Moving on to the out years, FY24 to FY29. The increases to the project budgets, based on what we've talked about here today, will be requested with additional funding via the CIP update. Based on the escalation rate changes, what we've estimated for the current projects listed on the CIP includes 10 new projects and 4 renovations. It's about $188 million total increase, which averages about $31 million a year. Average increase per project tracks with the estimates we've shown prior, and the variance you're seeing, 15 to 19 million in the middle schools, just depends on if one's in FY24 versus FY28, an additional escalation experienced.
So tell me again the overage total.
The total amount, we're estimating at about $188 million.
So 31 a year, not per project. So of those 14 projects, the 10 new and the 4 renovations, is that what yeah.
Over a 6-year.
Over a 6-year period.
Yes, correct.
And based on your earlier slide, expect that to be front-loaded because it looked, I think, because you showed the major costs for the next couple of years before things stabilize.
It is front-loaded, right. Yeah, that's how we adjusted in the model itself.
Right.
Right. So that takes us to the next steps. What do we do with this information next? And it's part of the annual update process. So the cost model is an input into the project budgets. We'll feed that into the budgets themselves, which also feed the CIP executive summary. We'll take the summary based off of these changes and any other ones that the CIP committee is developing terms of, adding additional projects on the out years for FY29 that just came on board. And we'll take that summary and give it to the debt team over at the county. I think at the 1st of March, March 4th is when we owe that to them.
Yes.
They'll take that,
March
they'll
4th.
input it into their financial model, which they're pulling all their revenue streams and other debt requirements in, and it'll spit out a result. I think sometime mid-March we're targeting, we're hoping. And so depending on what that comes back from them, how much they can support, we'll have to develop some options, make some decisions to bring back to this committee in March or April.
Thank you. So I recognize the time, but I still think it's important that we have a little bit of opportunity for asking questions.
My question was answered with the follow-up at the end, so.
I have somewhat related to, I think, where you just left off there. When do we run into the when do we say, all right, let's look for the extra money to pay for what we think we need? And when do we kick in value engineering and say, we're not going to do this? Value engineering, oftentimes a few years down the road, once you occupy it, you realize was a higher cost. So where are we in that stage of find the extra dollars versus, when you look at a lot of our schools, we've been doing a really good job of designing spaces where people want to be. Not just children want to be, but people want to be. And the quality of those spaces impacts the quality of learning, because if you feel like your community is invested in you, you're much more likely to learn. But I don't think we've added a lot of cost in doing that. I think we've used a lot of smarts to build effective spaces. They look great, but sometimes the public's going to look at them and say, oh, you're building all these beautiful spaces. Why don't you just build a warehouse because it's cheaper? It's not, usually. But how do we strike that balance? Because I think it's going to be really important to communicate that, particularly since we need to go to the voters for a bond to support this. How do we communicate the cost effectiveness? When are we saying, okay, we're going to cut programming? Where are we going to stop and draw the line and say, I'm sorry, this programming really is critical for the educational environment? Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. That's a good question in terms of how we're managing budgets for the current projects that are in design throughout this. Crazy escalation flowing around. Nobody knows what that number is. Lots of big numbers getting thrown around. How do you manage that compared to what our basis of our budgets are? And compared to the approved documents that go into building that, the design guidelines, the space standards, all the things that we built in the past, which leads to how we build schools. And so we've created our standard estimating template allows this in a very simplistic way that gives us information not only we need from the owner's seat to evaluate whether the design teams and the project teams are staying on budget as intended, but it's also allowing the project teams to pull out the market escalation separately and design to the number, which is the basis. That's a roundabout way to say that. We've asked the teams to pull out market escalation. How they do that, they can do it in a number of different ways. It's a mathematical exercise. You can use old data sets from a period of early 2021 before all this set in, compare the two numbers. Some firms have their own internal data based on national CMs that they use indexes, and you can back into it and back out of it. The escalation percentages, project to project, and independent estimates to independent estimates is all coming back pretty consistent. And so the methodology, while they're all using different, it's all telling the same story. And so what we'll see, a project will come in, we'll get an estimate at the end of SDs. It'll show perhaps buildings over 5, sites under 2, market escalation $10 million. We'll tell them, go back to the board, get the design back to budget, get that $5 million to zero. We'll deal with the escalation with the digital funding. as appropriate and closer to when the project bids, because we'll have a better idea of what that number is. But they need to go back and scrub the design and get the delta there back to where it needs to be. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think part of my reason for raising that is I really think learning to communicate this is going to be really, really critical, both with our county partners, but also to the general public. And I think the idea of separating out the escalation from the overall costs, I think that is something we can communicate. I think your discussion right there that let's get our design costs back to where we should be. That is, if you will, the value engineering, though I don't like that term. And then we deal with escalation separately. I think those are ideas that form the bones of how we communicate it. But I think it's going to be really important to communicate this, particularly as we go out to get probably a bond for the next phase of the CIP. Mark, you look like you're itching to say something.
Again, I couldn't resist. I wanted to further answer your question, and Jack and I and Douglas have had many conversations about what I'm getting ready to say, and Jack, you'll know when I bring it up. So we have talked about the cost of the buildings, and we have looked for opportunities not to deduct from the program, not to take away from that. But if you think about a building, it's a collage of spaces, and so they need to work together. But there are things that we can do to lessen the cost. And if you could see Jack smiling when I'm about to mention this, we have lots of conversations about glass and exterior construction. It's expensive. It looks great. So one of the things we're looking at in discussing is what are the components of a building that are really expensive that we can do a little bit less with. We meet the program, and the building looks great, and it's not a warehouse. But at the same time, we are building schools, and we need to be mindful of that. So we have these conversations and go back and forth all the time. And so one of the things we're trying to do is identify some parameters that are acceptable to us on things like exterior walls and glass and stuff, and make the designers adhere to that. They can get creative. They can do different things. We can let in natural light, which is always good. But at the same time, again, we need to look at those components that are really expensive and lessen those, all while maintaining the integrity of a great building.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's always a dance, and I think we do it fairly well. But when these pressures come, it just increases the need. Ms. Cash.
Well, I just really appreciate that, Mr. Strickland, because I think we do well, but I do think we have things like that do not affect the program for our students. And it's hard to sell our students deserve this program in these spaces when the majority of our schools don't have that. So when you're out looking for support for a bond, you've got the entire county that is looking at their building where their kids are going to. So even though I think what you said is so important, because I do think we have some things that could help us still have great spaces, but not have the expense. Thank you.
Well, that's why we have to stay engaged in that, right? Because we don't want our renovated older schools to come in at the point of, oh, we're not doing any of that nice stuff anymore. Just the new schools got that, right? So we've got to find that balance. But you're absolutely right. Let's look for the high cost. How do we, right? Just like the sites that we've looked at, we've got high cost sites, but we're actually using them effectively. Like we saw in the design today, the design last week. These are not ideal sites, but we can work within those parameters. So yeah, we've got to hold ourselves to a high standard, but that standard has to be both cost and program. The last thing I want to highlight to my colleagues, it didn't get mentioned today, but I want to encourage you to take a look at it in Sibley, and that's this document, the WCPSS Partnership Committee. Fantastic committee. This is a committee brought together of Wake County Schools people, as well as a lot of the partners who are doing the building. And read through that document, because it's insightful. Right? These are the things that we experience day in and day out trying to make it happen. And I think that gives us a lot of insight. I really was struck section E on page 5, thinking about the bidding and whatnot, in this market, projects have to be attractive to the trades. When all of the risk is put on the trades to absorb the market volatility, either way, they will not bid, or we're going to see escalated numbers. I mean, I think that's based on the stuff we talked about today, right? We want to lock in that guaranteed maximum price. That helps us. But if we lock in that guaranteed maximum price, that puts all the risk on the trades to absorb the volatility. And if that's going to be the case, we're not going to get as many bids, and we're not going to get as creative bids. And so just like I say, reading through this document, I think helps put it in the framework. We want to get the best value that we can. At the same time, if we create the scenario so that nobody wants to bid, we're not going to get good bids, and then we're going to inflate our own costs. So anyhow, it's kind of a behind-the-scenes document, but I just really encourage people to take a look at it. There's a lot of good stuff there. Thank you all for putting that committee together. I think these partnerships, just like our partnerships with the county, bring us incredible value. This brings us incredible value so that we can move forward together much more strategically. So I just wanted to highlight that. Great work, great information. Encourage all my colleagues to take a look at that.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. And I just wanted to add to the point that Mark and that Jack added, that there's a continued commitment from our team to communicate and work closely with our design teams and our CMs to ensure early on and throughout that we're staying close to where we need to be with respect to the design, to the budget, and to Mark's point, looking for those opportunities where we're within the program, but there are opportunities like the extensive glass, for instance, where perhaps we don't need that, but we're still within program, and then ensuring that message that's going out to our community is that we are still ultimately delivering top quality schools.
Absolutely.
Dr. Martin, this is Heather
Yes.
Scott line. I'm sorry, I had a quick question. And it's actually going back to the earlier part of this presentation, so my apologies for not jumping in during that time.
My apologies, too many windows open, and I wasn't on the WebEx window. Go for it. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. No, this was on me, but thank you. When looking at the CIP committee, Mr. Condon, forgive me if I didn't hear this, but are there any fine arts teachers or anyone from the fine arts program who serves on that committee?
So with respect to that, we do have 2 members of our academics that do participate with our CIP team, Mr. Fitz and Mr. Cook.
But there's no fine arts educators?
Not specifically that I'm aware about.
Okay, I was just thinking about that might be worth including in some way when we're looking at program assumptions. For example, just because of changes in code and whatnot over the years, there are some of our older schools, our older auditoriums that aren't allowed to have sort of the noise. Dr. Martin, you're more the theater person here, but that help the sound, project out instead of up. And they're not allowed to have those anymore. And so it just makes performances difficult. And when we're looking at performances for co-curricular subjects, things like that are a concern. Are we making sure that those types of considerations are going into new buildings? And are we getting feedback from our arts teachers at our newer buildings to hear their input on, is this appropriate amount of storage? There are specific types of storage needs you might have for not just for band, but also for visual arts, for dance, where schools do have that. So just something that I was concerned if we can make sure that we're capturing that feedback and those voices as well. And the last thing I wanted to do was, thank you all for this work and being sensitive to the changes in cost. But I think it's critical. This is just my opinion here. I want to share it, though, with my colleagues. I think it's critical that we continue to have solid facilities for our teachers, especially right now. Our teacher pipeline for education as a whole throughout our country is not very big. And Wake County Public School System pays the highest local supplement So if you're going to work in the Wake County Public School System, you're going to get paid well. But I think it's important that we also make all working conditions as great as possible, so that does, our teachers, when they're happy in their working conditions. And I think, as we heard at our last facilities meeting, it's important that this is a great place to work, because that makes it a great place for students to learn when we have educators who are dedicated and want to be here. So I just wanted to highlight that part of this work and express my gratitude that we're staying on top of it to make sure that we can keep moving forward with having new and great buildings and renovating the ones that need it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I'm making a note that to contact Mr. Cook, being the main academics representative on the CIP committee. I'm pretty sure he contacts Mr. Freddie Lee Heath pretty carefully to do that evaluation. So whether there would be an arts member on the CIP, right? We could go down the list. Do we have a sports person, an arts person? Do we have a performing arts, a visual arts? Do we have a science labs? Right? I mean, there are so many different sectors that sort of do need input. Whether they all would be on the CIP committee, probably not, because that would probably get a bit cumbersome. But we do need to make sure that the academics is reaching out to, maybe we need to sort of classify a set of sectors, to make sure that they probably should provide the input to Mr. Cook, who then brings that to the CIP team. But I think it is really important to make sure, as you note, that voice is heard in this process.
Right, and Dr. Burton, thank you for saying that. I was just looking at where I saw the stakeholder groups CIP committee consults with. It does mention athletics, technology, media services, but I did not see fine arts on that list, which is why I asked the question.
Absolutely. All right. We have always an opportunity for new business. I think we've kind of talked about some of that. We spent a fair amount of time talking about sort of understanding the demographics as potential new business. Is there anything else anybody wants to highlight quickly at this time? We're not going to go into big discussion, but just
Is
put
this
on the
other
radar.
than the new business we've talked about in the past, like the calendars on our schools for capacity?
The calendar issue is, as Mr. Croza knows, I raise it about every chance I get. We talk about it regularly. When does it come here? When does it come other places? That still is very high priority work. Maybe even part of strategic planning. I don't know where we're at on that score,
I
but
just
yeah.
thought it was in good timing with the amount of overreach we're going to incur with buildings. But that's just my point of view.
No, it absolutely is still very much on the agenda. Anything else? Mr. Congdon, future updates?
Yes.
Where we need to go?
Of course. So as we look forward, just a few highlights to share. At our first board meeting for the month of March, we will be bringing you the Hilltop Needmore Elementary School early site package, as well as the Du Bois Center mobiles. We will be back with you all here on March 9, and we'll be looking to provide you, as I said earlier, that first rough update for this year's rubric. Also efforting to bring you that executive summary update in that meeting as well. As we move on to our second meeting in March with our board here, we'll be looking to bring the GMP for the Fuquay-Varina Middle School. As we look further and we head to April, we will then be at the facilities here with you all again on April 13th. And we will be looking to do a follow-up with rubric prioritization, as well as just an overall review of the CIP as we did last year. So we'll be following that same approach. And then in April, or probably likely May, we will be bringing the schematic design for Swift Creek Elementary School to y'all.
Very good. And as we've discussed, part of what we're hoping to do with the prioritization rubric is to do a little bit of our education, right? What goes into the health and safety evaluation? What goes into these other pieces of the evaluation so we know how things are prioritized? And the other thing we all want to look at is, we talked about it a bit last year, and we want to make sure we're paying attention to it, is what happens year to year with the rubric? If we make some adjustments to fix this problem at a school, does it take it off of the rubric? You know, what's the lifetime on the rubric, right? There's going to be some noise. That's inevitable. And if we have the noise in, let's say, the bottom 5 out of the top 25, that makes sense. But if we see things going from the top 5 down to the bottom 5, then we start to raise some questions. So those are things that we're going to want to, we as a board, as a committee, I think want to pay attention to. And that's why we've kind of got a multi-pronged approach to looking at the prioritization rubric. We're going to get sort of the preliminary and the background, and then we'll go on to come up with the final discussion. So, all right. With that and no further business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you again for a good meeting.
Thank you very much.
There you go.
We're going to know